Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 4 of PGIM India Mutual Fund presents LiveMint, Amend, Adjust, and Adapt. This is a series of high-powered panel discussions that we have been doing to try and figure out the success mantras for the new normal in the post-COVID world. And if, like me, you're wondering when the post-COVID world is coming, I'm afraid that we don't have a clear answer to, but we can try and tell you how to cope, and that's what we've been trying to do here. Today, in this particular episode, we're going to take a look at leadership in these turbulent times, both leadership and how you can motivate yourself. I'm Vikram Chandra, the founding of Editorji, and we've got a bunch of really great speakers whom we're going to talk to. And a little later in the show, I'm also going to be talking to Captain Raghu Raman, who's one of the best motivational speakers, who also will draw some examples from what can happen with the army and what we can do in our own lives. But let me, without taking any more time myself, introduce a really special guest we've got. Mr. D. Shivakumar is with us, the Group Executive President, Corporate Strategy and Business Development of the Aditya Birla Group. Mr. Manish Sabharwal, who's the Chairman and Co-founder of Teamlease Services Limited. Mr. Ajit Menon, the CEO of PGIM India. And finally, it's a pleasure, a privilege to have with us Mr. Pullela Gopichand, who's the Chief National Coach of the Indian Badminton Team. And in case you know anything at all about motivation and leadership, well, who better than him, considering what he's been able to do, not just himself, but also the number of people he's been motivated to really become world beaters. So thank you all so much for joining us. And in fact, let me dive straight in by coming to you, Gopi. Great to have you with us. You know, leadership and motivation. Who could need leadership and motivation more in a situation like this than sports people? I mean, the world is, for the rest of us, work still continues, work from home. But how are world champion sports people going to be working from home when they can't play with anybody? We don't know when the championships are going to start. The Tokyo Olympics should have happened by now, and it hasn't. So clearly, they face a lot of challenges.
Yes, of course. I think for us in sport, for many of them at least who have played the highest level, day in and day out, it's always sport, a lot of travel, a lot of tournaments. And the only time you get is from injuries. This time, the initial, say, a month of the breakdown or the lockdown is when the players would think that, okay, it's a time to recoup and get better. But as time goes on, it was possible that somebody could take it both ways. Somebody could use the lockdown and the rest to recoup and get better for the future, or somebody could actually get panicky and break down. So for many of the top players, I would think it's been a break because some of them have played, say, 10 years of badminton continuously. And the only time they took a break was injury. But since this was something without an injury, they've been able to work harder. Although it was difficult at home and competing was difficult, playing was difficult. But actually, since badminton is such a physical sport, many of them have actually taken the time out to get physically and mentally stronger, and across the world. And I think that's been something which I'm actually in a way happy for the players.
No, I'm not surprised by that, but I just was curious. Like, you must be speaking to some of them, so maybe you could share some anecdotes that all of these world champions we have right here in India and world beaters. What are you telling them to motivate them? How are you motivating them long distance for starters?
I think we've the week after, actually, we started having our training sessions online, and this was really strange, but we've kind of figured a way to work out and get things started. And even now, after we have started to play also, there's a lot more online. And for me personally, it's really helped because I've been able to connect to each of those players and my own coaching and support staff much more than I've done in the normal scenarios. So in certain ways, we've been used to it, we've got used, but a week from where we were actually doing about 12 sessions a week, and almost now we are doing 14 sessions a week. So there's no break at all, with sessions on general knowledge for younger kids and ethics and values, and then we were doing motivational lecture series. So we've actually done well, because at the end of the day, for me, you can take it both ways. And the best way is to come out of it fitter physically than you were earlier, and stronger mentally than you were earlier. And that's what I would believe was my advice. And also that's what the players have been told and they're following.
Okay, so looking ahead at the next big championship, whenever it comes, whether it's Tokyo or something else. I know you teach a number of people at various levels, but among the Indian team members, which of them do you think has been the most disciplined under lockdown and raring to go, and their technique is still all there and you're not really worrying about them? I mean, I'm asking the rest of us can stop worrying, because you probably know.
Well, Sindhu has done well. In fact, all of the players, in fact, have been really motivated. So I'm really happy that all of them have really pushed, and they were up to mark. They were up in the morning. We would have sessions at 6 in the morning, and everybody would attend those sessions. So players have been definitely very focused, and they've been. I've been. In a way, I would say that since muscle memory is not lost, many of these players, or all of these players who played for long, it doesn't take them a while to come back. It just takes a very short time for them to come back once they're physically and mentally there.
Okay, fantastic. Let's come back to you in a couple of minutes. But Mr. Sabharwal, at Teamlease and the other teams, like, what are you doing to? Is the team at Teamlease being able to come together? How are you talking to them? What are you doing to motivate them? And how do you think leadership should be displayed at a time like this?
No, I think the most complicated part is, a leader is a dealer in hope, but hope is not a strategy. And we all are sort of, as you said, it's unmodelable. We don't know whether we are at the start, middle, or end of the virus, and that makes planning really hard. And so any vision, any goals, any strategy becomes sort of meaningless every day, because, in June, we thought there was a light at the end of the tunnel, but that light at the end of the tunnel turned out to be an incoming train, right? It wasn't exactly hope. So I think that all of us have to be very careful with the posturing of, we know what's going on, we know when this is going to end, but obviously this is going to end. Corona is not climate change, it's a passing shower. So I think the balance of striking that sort of optimism with realism is probably the hardest part of the current situation. But, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Digital learning has been brought from 2030 to 2020 in 90 days. Digital payments, their destiny has been brought forward. So some of our businesses are really benefiting from the digitalization super cycle. So I think that we have to be honest with our people. That's probably the hardest part, that, we can't we don't want to make promises we can't keep. But I think overall, being honest, and I think there's a much larger willingness to make sacrifices than most of us thought there would be, because unlike other sort of incidents, this is a global incident. It's synchronized all across the country. It's synchronized across all professions. It's synchronized across all ages. And so I think that being honest is really a strategy which is required despite all our temptations to be optimistic. So my sense is that, modern science this will end in 90 days or 180 days or 365 days. I don't think it's going longer than that. So all we can do is make sure that real capital and real talent are allocated to our biggest opportunities. And it's that sort of, as Pullela said, that, his team is getting mentally and physically fitter than they have ever been. That's what companies like us are using this time of reflection and stepping back to sort of reallocate capital and talent to our biggest opportunities. But fundamentally, all of us, till we know whether we're at the start, middle, or the end of the virus, are all sort of winging it every day.
Winging it every day. Mr. Shivakumar, if I could turn to you. Now, obviously, there are certain businesses, right? So some of us who are privileged to be working in digital businesses or digital-only businesses are pretty much saying, yes, it's personally there are challenges, but professionally or from a company point of view, it's great. And as Manish was saying, there are certain areas where you will not struggle to the same extent. other parts of the group or in other fields, like Pullela was saying, if you're a badminton champion, what are you going to do? It becomes more difficult. So when someone like you is managing a huge group like the Aditya Birla Group, what is it that you're telling people? What are you telling your employees? Are you recognizing the fact, for example, that certain areas are going to bounce back really fast or maybe even do better? Others will take much longer to come back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vikram, for having me on the show. So if you look at the construct of the GDP of the various countries, you look at services being a very big chunk. So India's services is about 55%. Okay, now industry is about 30, and then agriculture is about 15. So now you look at, if you're not able to go out, you're not able to fly, you're not able to have tourism, all the issues around services, those industries will take quite some time to come back. They might come back 2-3 years later, not right now. But one thing this has taught us is that in every business, I think a digital business model is a default business model. And a digital business model, I simply state as the shortest distance between the brand or the producer to the consumer and the least frictionless path. These are the two things I will say. So I think every business has to reorient itself to say, we have to be digital first today. Consumers have gone digital far faster than either leaders or companies or ecosystems. So consumers have taken to it, and consumers have learned a lot more out of it than companies. So I think this pandemic has ensured that definitely to happen. Next, if you look at the various business models, business to government, if you start like that, the government has been a very big buyer of many services right now. IT services is a great example. Almost every government office wants to set up a Teams system on their thing. Now, if you look at business to business, I think you need to form partnerships and really need to value who your big customers are. And if you look at business to consumer, those type of businesses, I think health has become extremely important. And if you look at the FMCG market in India, the mass end has declined, the premium end has declined, but the mid end is the one which is growing. The mass end has declined because people are worried about quality, and also they don't have cash flows to really serve the market. So I would advocate that I would tell every leader, I think you need to do two things. You need to have a microscope to exploit what you're good at and really look out 21 months with a telescope to say, put a team to say, what can we do better? I think that's the way to do it. I think all leadership teams are at the same starting point thanks to the pandemic, and legacy will come with leadership teams who handle this better.
All right, leadership teams that will handle it better. Ajit, I noticed you nodding your head. Look, let's face it. Many people, and I'll include myself among them, have been saying for a period of time, not just now, but for years, there is going to be a day when everything is going to change and digital and technology is going to rule the world. I don't think any of us thought that it would take a pandemic to happen before everyone says, yes, that's the way life is going to be. But that fundamental change, do you agree with what Shiv and Manish and Pullela were all saying, that yes, that there are some fundamental differences that now have to be internalized? And leadership means not necessarily looking back to the past and saying, but that's the way it used to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years ago. Because you could argue that even 1 year, 2 years, 3 years ago, these changes were always going to happen. You were always going to go digital. You would always end up having conversations like this on video conference and not think twice about them. We were always going to do it. It's just that this has accelerated the process and perhaps made it irreversible.
Yeah, absolutely, Vikram. I completely agree to that. And I think that, as you mentioned, there have been fundamental changes in the way business is being organized and people are working. And I think one of the most fundamental things there is what we've realized is the old command and control structure and the hierarchies that we've built in organizations. In this pandemic, for instance, given India's diversity and the federal structure, the locking and unlocking has been not synchronous across the country, and therefore local teams in different places have had to really step up and be given direction as to what to do, rather than setting all the direction only from the top. So I think one fundamental aspect I see changing is the whole attitude towards the command and control structure and the hierarchy, and working as Mr. Shivakumar said, in a far more collaborative way with your teams as well as your other stakeholders on the ground. And you're right. There is a tendency when you look back and say that, well, this sort of top-down structure, we've seen successes before of that. I think that overconfidence can trip you up in the sort of ambiguity that is playing out, right now. And it's so much more important to sort of take that leap of faith with your teams and listen to sort of diverse views that are coming up from the ground. And I think those are two things that are important. I think what we've done in the organization at PGIM, for instance, is to have more teams of diverse departments working together to solve for issues in the here and now. And that's actually motivated people as well, because they're really contributing to solving for the issues that we have at hand and moving forward.
Right, Gopi, I can hear, I can see you listening to all of this and saying, look, all of this sounds really nice and this is great. But how on earth in sports are you going to have a digital world? I can assure you that having, Saina and Sidhu, for example, playing badminton on e-sport is not as much fun as watching them play in real life. So sports perhaps is an exception. Although even here things could change. You may have a while before stadiums are packed, and we're all getting used to watching, for example, football matches happening with canned audiences, right? Canned applause coming in as people are going back and forth, pre-recorded, or being electronically generated, which is even more scary. Where do you see the long-term changes going to come in sports? Do you think at some point audiences will come back, and sports is one area that will not change radically? What do you think?
I think on one front, sport, fitness, immunity, all these things go together, positivity. So in these times, if people had live sport happening, I think there's something to look forward to and rejoice. So I think sport is important from that perspective. And also, sport can't go out because for immunity, health and all, it's very, very important. So from a certain perspective, it is. A lot more people have got into digital media doing fitness and workouts. And even athletes, say we would have a group class of things which is not necessarily playing, but if you're stretching or if you're kind of warming up or if you're strengthening exercises, probably this is a better way in the sense we could actually start having fitness sessions online and monitoring happening online, and also we being able to monitor sessions and academies or training centers across different parts of the country using technology as a medium. So I think it's going to be that way. Live sport, professional sport leagues, I think these will come back very quickly. And what my concern is of the local gym, the swimming pool, the guys who are working on the ground with 30 kids or 50 kids, the parents who will think twice before sending their kid to a class of gymnastics or swimming or football. I think that, and people taking sport as a profession, who's a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, thinking maybe it's not worth it, I'll lose 2 years and 3 years, and that could mean a major thing. So I think from my side, professional sport, people will adapt very quickly, and they will do a lot to make these things happen. But what my concern is of the next levels, where you have domestic circuits, where the festivals and the bubbles are not so easy to form, or kids in younger age groups wanting to take sport as a profession, will they have the confidence to? What will go up is general awareness of fitness and health, because people not traveling will have a lot more time. So online, in terms of fitness, will grow dramatically.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more that I think the one thing that really we have to find a way to restart all sports at one level, because people should be practicing in their own houses. If there's one thing which coronavirus shows, it's how important it is to be fit and healthy. But also, as you said, the psychological impact for the nation, for people who are locked down or not having a very normal life, to be able to get back into cheering for the national team or cheering for your teams, the psychological impact of that could potentially be huge. But I just wanted to get your assessment that I do believe, and I do agree with you that competitive sports will restart and restart very soon. It's already starting. Do you see the audiences coming back, or are you telling people get used to playing without having cheering crowds?
I think especially in badminton, I think the professional players will very quickly adapt to playing without audiences. And that's something which is okay. In a sense, no sport to sport without audience is always taken as a positive. So I think we might find they also talk about virtual experiences to fans through technology. I think that could make you able to watch it, and that could probably give you some certain sense. But live watching might take a bit of time, but not too long.
Right. That's interesting. Let's see when some of that restarts. I guess the IPL will be one interesting thing to see what happens once the IPL begins less than a month from now. Mr. Shivakumar, just wanted to ask you about, I mean, you're talking about some of the lasting changes that might be happening. Gopi was just talking about the fact that it could be a while before those audiences are getting back. This entire concept of remote workforces, leaders are now sitting and really trying to take a decision on what do we do, how do we make it the right balance between productivity, employee satisfaction, safety. I know, and this is something which a lot of people are struggling with. Even when you can work from home, and digital businesses can work from home without too much problems, many people are sitting and scratching their head and saying, is it good? Do you miss something out in terms of team dynamics by not having people together in the same room? What would your advice to leaders be on this front?
Yeah. So if you look at remote working, Vikram, two countries in the past have specifically not taken to work from home. One was Japan and one was India. Because a lot of people derive their mental satisfaction from the fact that they work hard in an office, that their colleagues see them, then they go home late, and everybody recognizes that. But I think one thing this has taught us is which functions can work from home, which functions can work from anywhere, and which functions do you truly need to come to office. I think that's very, very clear right now. For example, if you look at Cav & Care as a company, C.K. Ranganathan has closed his head office, he's closed all his sales offices and said, I don't need an office anymore. He's the first guy to actually do this. Now, if you're a salesperson, there's actually no reason for you to go to office. Now, if you step back and look at over the last 20, 30 years, why did we go to an office? We went for the camaraderie, we went to meet the boss, but most important, we went for collaboration. Now, all the collaborative tools are available on your smartphone. Because your server and computer was at your desk, you needed to go there. Today, you don't need to go there at all. You can work from anywhere with having Salesforce software, whatever it is, and collaborate with anybody across the board. But I think, almost certainly, I believe most companies will take at least 25 to 30% of their workforce and put them in a work from home or a work from anywhere mode. But when you start in the organization, like today I'm talking to you from my office, I think you need to be extremely clear that health is very important. You need to keep people safe. Absolutely. You cannot do hot desking anymore because people will be unsure of coming to a hot desk as to who has sat there before. Okay, that open plan office will be a challenge. We've known historically that open plan offices, people tend to take more sick leave than closed plan offices. Okay, so I think the organization needs to redesign it. If you look at hotels and people like that, you need sneeze guards. You need some barrier, you need some protection. So I think we'll get used to a new way, but I think working from home, working from anywhere is something which is an absolute viable option today. But more important, I tell you, in terms of a cohort, and I said this in one of my seminars, is that with working from home, the biggest cohort and talent pool which will come into the market is the work from home women. We've always not got women at the table. Now today, every company has no excuse to say, we don't have women. You can employ hordes of women to work from home.
Manish, I want to take this thought forward because I could be wrong on this, but when you look back to 2020, 30 to 40 years from now, coronavirus may or may not be forgotten. We hope that it's all forgotten and not that many people actually died or got it when we look back at it. but the end of the office and the start of a new way of working from home. Now, many people are saying exactly what you said, that it's actually far more viable than you once thought it was. And that's partly because of exactly what you're saying. If you can be on a Zoom or a Google Meet or whatever, see people's faces, be able to interact on groups like this, the need to go to office is less. Advantage one. Advantage two, you're saving on commute time. That's another big one. Getting women into the workspace, third very major advantage. Climate change and the impact on pollution and what we are doing to, all of that, another major advantage. But there are other things and challenges that will have to be dealt with. For example, this is one of the things that we, for example, are finding, that the divide in, do people have big enough homes? It's all very well to say, let's work from home and you've got a nice, when you've got a room which is private. But what if your employees in a one-room house, sharing with children and sharing with parents and sharing with others? Not that easy to look at that person and say work from home. So then what happens? Does everyone leave the cities and go off back to places where they can be connected, and everyone has a big home? That's why.
First of all, you have to recognize 90% of our labor force can't work from home. So this cognitive elite ayatollahs who are talking about between 5 and 10% of the labor force. If you work with your hands and legs, you can't work from home. If you work with your mind, you can work from home.
Farming and agriculture, you can't work from home.
Yeah, so 90%. No, salespeople can't work from home. The three fastest growing segments of India's job market, sales, customer service, and logistics, can't work from home at the bottom of the pyramid. So let's be clear, we're talking about 10% of the labor force. The second thing is work from home so far has provided productivity. It's provided continuity. We don't know whether it's provided productivity. When Andrew Carnegie was once asked how many people work at US Steel, he said about half. Most people I know are saying about half of the people are productive. About half the people, if they are honest, they should apply for leave. So I think the net outcome of this is, for the cognitive elite, they will have to decide whether, because working from home has also become living at work. I think no partitions, no transitions, no pauses is not really good for mental health. So maybe we will conclude that, some partitions will be better. And for people at the bottom of the pyramid, they can't. And anyway, an argument against offices is an argument against cities, right? New York's GDP is equal to Russia. It only has 6% of the people and 0.00005% of the land. So there are some benefits to coming together. But where I will accept that this is a randomized control trial, which will take flexible workforces, flexible working, from 5% of the labor force in India, which it was before, to about 15 or 20. But I don't think this is the end of employment. I don't think this is the end of offices, and I don't think it's the end of cities. Historians warn against a disease called presentism, right? Where you think today's circumstances are so special and so unique. So I think that we are not at the end of employment, offices or cities. We are at the cusp of an increase in flexibility for 10% of the labor force. 90% of the labor force cannot work from home.
Okay, can I take you up on that, just from the point of view of playing devil's advocate out here? If we don't get into presentism and we look at a broader swathe of history, you could argue that a large proportion of the human force has been working from home anyway. If you look at women in the workplace, or the work that a large number of women have been doing, that's half the population, they've been working at home or working from home in some form or the other. You look at farmers, what you're saying about boundaries, if you look at farmers, you look at people who are working in agriculture, they don't have the luxury of saying we are going to make any differences. There's not going to be a 5-day week or a 7-day week. If you're a dairy farmer, you're tilling the field, you do it every single day and you do it from home. So again, you could argue that we are really debating a small section of office-going people, which is always the minority. Playing devil's advocate out here.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a law, Coese's law, that organizations are only worth it if the transaction costs are lower by people coming together. Yeah. But I think a long vast swath of history, which you're talking about, from 0 to 1800, per capita GDP was flat. GDP took over from 1800 in the last 200 years. Otherwise, for most of human history, lives have been nasty, brutish, and short. So I think that, we have to be, there will be more flexibility. But I think I am losing in board meetings. I'm losing the peripheral vision. I'm losing when new people join. I mean, the worst tax is on young people. Imagine if you're a management trainee graduating today, you don't get to sit in the back of the room and listen. How do you learn? Kids learn by osmosis. You know, all of us are today making more withdrawals than deposits into the bank of social capital. A journalist, you have your network, you called everybody for the show. A poor kid who graduated from journalism school had no chance of getting through to all of us in today's environment. So I would be careful that working from home is against people who have broadband. Only 5% of people have broadband. Working of people is against people who have space. Less than 5% of India has a room. Working for home is against young people because they don't have existing social capital which they are depleting in this environment. So I have no argument that for 20, 30 years there has been a deconstruction of organizations, there has been a move to flexibility. But I do think that living in New York or living in Palo Alto, you are 50 times more productive than living in Moscow or in Kanpur.
All right, really interesting discussion, on various aspects, and I think all of this can be debated. Ajit, if I could turn to you and then start getting closing comments from everybody. Ajit, one other question where leadership comes in, to take a point that Shivakumar was saying, and Manish was actually saying the same thing. You've got to figure out as leaders, where do I allocate capital, for example? Are we seeing that process, for example, accelerating? I've seen a lot of chatter taking place almost constantly about look at the stock market, look at what's happening to tech stocks in America, for example. Crazy highs, all-time highs, Tesla 2100, whatever it is now. Is it a bubble or is it not? Two ways of looking at it. One is, yes, this is a bubble and it's not. Then people are saying that this time it'll be different when it is not. The other could be, as Shivakumar and Manish is saying, it's really reallocation of capital moving to the long-term winners in the new world. Which way would you analyze it?
I think, Vikram, it would be the latter in a large sense of the word, because, from the vantage of Prudential, what we have been seeing, obviously, is that while we talk about high valuations for many of these FANG stocks or technology stocks, what has happened during the pandemic also is that the market for many of these companies have actually expanded exponentially, whether it's payment systems or whether it's just consumer, like businesses like Amazon, where people are buying stuff online. So what we've noticed is that over many cycles, and Prudential's been there for 140 years, is that innovation takes over quite a bit during such strong downdrafts in economy and markets, and business models, as Shivakumar was saying, change, consumer behaviors change, and companies that actually are willing to fail, learn, get the insights, take enabling technology, move forward, are the ones that are actually becoming the winners in the new world, creating moats around themselves. Now, while that might be true, and this whole innovation-led growth, ingenuity-led growth is in time immemorial, and those have been successful businesses, I think this time around, the other thing that we might need to think about for some kind of these business models also is regulation. And what regulation might end up doing while we're looking at these businesses expanding. Already we are seeing noises, whether it's in Europe or in Australia, related to privacy and data usage. And what that might do to these businesses is a little bit in the future as you try to figure out what might happen. So from our vantage point, we're still sticking to the fundamentals, take care of asset allocation, make sure you're diversified across asset classes and not get swayed by stories that, oh, it's gold this time, or it's real estate this time, or it's tech stocks this time. I mean, concentration is a killer.
All right, great. I want to get final thoughts from all of you on motivation, on the important to, how do you motivate yourself? How do you keep yourself going through this tough period? Mr. Shivakumar, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
If you're motivating yourself or anybody else, what do you do? How do you keep yourself going?
Yeah, so if you ask personally about me, I've been running a lot. I've been doing about 8 kilometers a day. I've got physically much fitter. I've really rethought my diet. I've read a lot. In the initial days, I read everything about COVID, and then I stopped because it was just becoming too much of a overload. I've really read, considerably in this point of time. Next is really engaging and energizing with people on calls such as these and getting and feeding off their energy. Talking to colleagues, talking to peer group, talking to people outside of the industry, and really having meaningful chats with them. That's how I kept myself busy.
All right, Manish.
I just think that crises like this are the best time to make the investments, or at least have change. From my perspective, where regulatory cholesterol is a big problem holding me back, I think a policy window, which is when change will happen because there is so much pain. So I think we are motivated by the fact that everything that held India back, the labor laws, the regulatory cholesterol, the banking systems problems, the compliance issues, the education reform, all is on the table. There is a real policy window for India. So the next 25 years will hopefully be different from the last 25 years. And we have to get ready for that as an organization and as a team. So that's what we're really focused on, is that this is the time to be making the down payment for what hopefully will one of the few places in the world where growth will be left in the next 20 years. We were always a 10 horsepower engine running on 2 horsepower, but hopefully now we will get rid of the cholesterol and get to our real potential.
Well, let's hope you're right on that. Ajit, motivating yourself.
Well, I guess for me, Vikram, it's been just the fact that, we've all been cooped up. The whole family's been cooped up together. Else my daughter would have been flying away. She's in the 12th grade and would have gone away for education. And we were waiting for that day, but we've pushed a couple of semesters back. And so we are all together, and just being together, having conversations, and purposefully taking it a little slow. The first part of the lockdown was, we were all excited. There was a lot of work happening, a lot of hobbies that came up. Health and fitness continues at this point of time, but I think it's got stressful, I must admit. And therefore, in the last couple of months, I think it's been about taking it slow, taking time with the family, connecting at a more personal level, both with family and at the professional level with friends, colleagues, and clients, have actually been very energizing and a learning experience. Also drives a lot of insights into the business that we've been able to use and move the business forward. So I think for me that's been motivating, just getting more personal at every level.
Great. Pullela Gopichand, I noticed you smiling when you heard many people on the panel saying, we've used this to get time to get fit and to exercise. Actually, a lot of people have, which is, I guess, the good news. How do you motivate yourself?
Well, I think for me also, it's been the case. I probably have been the fittest in the last 10 years. So I think it's really worked the last few months. And also for me, I've been traveling almost continuously since my playing days, which is about 1991. So I think for me, the initial part was, wow, we have a break and I can stay. But I think the important thing is we don't know where we are going, when this is going to end. And I think to have goals would only make things a lot more complex. I think to just slow down and focus intensely on the process of what you can do, forgetting about what will happen, has been something which for me has really worked. And for my students also, it's the same. You don't know when we're going to come out of this, but just make sure that whenever we come out of it, we come out stronger physically and stronger mentally.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. It's really been instructive to get so many thoughts from you on what companies should do, what we should do as individuals, and also what you're telling people to do. So thank you all so much for joining us with us.
Thank you, Vikram.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Joining us to help in figuring out the path forward is somebody who's really a very powerful motivational speaker. If you haven't heard one of his talks yet in telling you how to get up there and go out and do things, you really missed a lot. So you're going to get a chance to hear it, and then I'm sure you'll keep on hearing him going forward. Captain Raghu Raman is the founding CEO of NATGRID. He's the ex-president of Reliance Industries, a distinguished fellow at ORF and author. He, of course, led with his own examples, both in the army and then the corporate sector, and also his stellar work in the government. So, Raghu, it's always a pleasure to talk to you and to meet you. So it's great having you with us. Let me just start off with the obvious concept. Leadership is always important. But perhaps a crisis, such as the crisis that we have just seen, and it's not just a crisis in India, it's a global crisis, that underlines the real importance of leadership more than anything else. Would you agree with that?
I would actually go so far as to say that during great times, managers can do the job. During great times when the markets are good, business is flowing, there's general optimism around. I think Excel sheets run the organization. I think crises are the times where leadership is all about taking a decision between one wrong and another wrong. That's the real tough world of leaders. It's not between a right and a wrong. A right and a wrong is an easy decision to take. It's more difficult, as you're aware, to take a decision between a right and another right. But the worst is to take between one wrong and another wrong, and that's what leadership is all about. So I guess it is during times of crisis not only that leaders are required the most, but perhaps the most number of leaders are produced during crisis as well.
Leadership also is really, taking your point forward, that this is the time when it really gets tested. Somebody whom you may think has been a good leader, or a fair leader, or even a great leader, suddenly a crisis hits and you say, my God, this person's actually pretty terrible. And he or she is not being able to cope. And similarly, somebody whom you didn't think is that good a leader suddenly steps up. Is that common?
That is common, but I think it's being a little simplistic to look at leadership only as during a crisis, suddenly a person whom you did not think springs up. And I think leadership has two distinct at least two, more than two definitely, but two major construct. One is the competence of a leader. Now, there may be some great leaders who are very, very competent. Let me take an army example because it will illustrate it well. Great leaders capable during the First World War who understood cavalry, who understood classical set-piece battles very well. But when mechanized warfare came, these great leaders were completely useless. I mean, you can take a business simile to say that there are leaders who are very, very good in the brick and mortar space. But when digitization came, these leaders couldn't think in that degree of fluidity. So very clearly, there is one component of leadership that is extremely critical during times of crisis, because in crisis, the situation is very fluid. So you need leaders who can take decisions based on certain frameworks that they have practiced in the past, that are abstract, that are not hardwired to a particular situation. At the same time, you also need a skill in leaders, which is the ability to stand firm like a rock and at least indicate to his followers and his colleagues that he or she has a visibility into what needs to happen in the future.
Well, I'm going to return to that theme because it helps us and set the stage for where to go forward. But let me just come back to some of the army examples you were talking about. And now, on the battlefield, as you know, as a leader, you have got to motivate from the front. You've got to display a certain amount of courage, perhaps. You have to be decisive. You have to inspire your men to follow you into, virtually face the odds. And if the leadership is bad, the result of the battle can be very different. I mean, again, let's just take an army example. Look at 1962. And the army didn't change that much. 5 years later in 1967, and then 9 years later in 1971, a totally different result. And you could argue that things were not, okay, the equipment wasn't quite as good and blah, blah, blah. But you could argue it had a lot to do with the leadership at a high level and also on the ground. What was 7th Brigade doing at Namchak, whatever it is. You could debate that the leadership is what was really made the difference. The fighting men were the same in both cases.
Well, I don't want to get into those specific examples because in hindsight, you can argue and paint any situations, anything. And you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it is the leadership to be blamed for anything and everything. So even if equipment is not there, that also is the leader's fault. You can't say the 62 battle was not, because that is also the leader's fault. So eventually, when success happens, the leaders claim the success. When failures happen, they have to claim the accountability of the failure. So there is no debate on that. However, as I said, it's not as simple. Leadership is not that simple. It's layered. So there is something called tactical leadership, which happens at a very tactical level. And there are elements like bravado, leading from the front, inspiring your men, leading the charge against all odds, holding the fort till the last man, last round. These are the kind of, the motivations which run at that level. At an operational level, where you have to collaborate, where you have to coordinate with the Air Force, with the Navy, with other units, other formations, work with the local population, in a Kashmir-like situation where you have to take people along, then it's not so much about bravado and it's not about being broad-chested. It's much more nuanced. It's much more the ability to give as much as you are taking away. It's your ability to negotiate. It is your ability to get conflicting individuals working together. And at the strategic level, there is no room for bravado. In the strategic level, there is no room to say, buddy, let's go there. There is no room for that. In the strategic level, you have to be very, very astute. You have to be analytical. You have to forego certain battles, victory to win the overall war. You can't be fighting for the media or for a 5 o'clock briefing every evening. You have to be looking at 5 generations ahead in terms of will you incapacitate a country in such a way that it is incapable of being an enemy in the future, even if that incapacitation means cooperation with that enemy. So that's strategic thinking. Now, you cannot have the traits of one level automatically move to the next level. And, you know, that's why you find many young captains who may be great as operational leaders may not be such good strategic leaders, because certain situations require aim, they require ready, fire, and then aim. They require that. They require you to be prophylactic. And certain other situations require you to be very, very nuanced. And I think as the level goes up, the elements of leadership also change. And I think that's very important to understand.
Yeah, so train them also correctly. And by the way, even true for the people who are commanding on the ground. So if you're a lieutenant or a captain commanding a company, you need to keep in mind, you know, that do I want to become a general? And that's, by the way, it's a perfect analogy which can also be followed from people who are launching startups. We see so many startups where there's a great founder or a great founding team, which is fine in coming up with the idea of fighting the battle when it's a tactical battle at a certain level. They need to learn when to step back and get somebody else in when the company becomes much bigger.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm actually, you know, since you mentioned it, it's very interesting. And as an analogy, I've actually been in positions where I've had the, fly on the wall look at several such leaders, several such startups in my previous, both in Reliance and before that in Mahindra's, had an opportunity to see where young entrepreneurs who would be extremely good, exactly as you said, in taking the, and I had a boss called Ullas Yargok, he's still there in Mahindra's, who I think explained it to me many, many years ago, really beautifully. I don't know whether he remembers it or not. And I genuinely think I needed that lesson at that point of time. He spoke about a startup being like a rocket. And he says that there is a rocket stage, which is the booster stage. And there is an engine, which is the booster engine, whose job it is to take the rocket and put it out of escape velocity, out of the gravitational force. But that booster section of the rocket doesn't go all the way to the moon. It doesn't say, maine shuru kiya, isliye main isko, moon tak le. So he, and I think that's very significant, that a kind of leadership that is required during a certain phase of a company, a startup phase of a company, is very different from a kind of leadership that is required in a steady state, where you have to pay much more attention to regulatory implications, the governance nuances, the shareholders' expectations, and so many other elements which are not there necessarily in a startup. In a startup, the failure rates can be much higher because the failure is only in terms of money loss. It's not in terms of brand, reputation, legal, so many other considerations that come into play. So yeah, I think it's very similar in both the environments, and very few entrepreneurs actually are even destined and should also go all the way to the top. And it's not really necessary that everyone becomes a Jeff Bezos who starts it and takes it right to the end. A lot of people bring in professional help, or they even, the whole concept of sell out is exactly that. You take it to a stage where you think you can run it, and then you sell it to a more experienced and a larger scale management.
Yeah, and I guess that's true no matter how powerful the leader is and how much you think the leadership is. Look at Apple, just hit $2 trillion in market cap. Who would have thought that would have happened when Steve Jobs died and people said, okay, this is the end of Apple. What was that, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. So people don't, sometimes you can have others who will step into those shoes and take it forward. So that's one thing which I think everyone should keep in their mind and perhaps, motivate themselves with it. But talking about motivation, that's one of the other major correlations perhaps you can draw between the army and the corporate world. You've got to motivate the troops. And in a time of crisis like this, like in a time of war, you've got to motivate your troops. And I don't think I've ever seen a war movie which doesn't have the leader going out there and whipping up the people with an inspirational speech. Is that something which all leaders should be doing right now, making sure that all their troops are fired up or finding out how to deal with this?
So, Vikram, like many other things which happen in the army, the ceremony that you see of the officer rallying the troops is it's the manifestation of a much deeper infrastructure of leadership that you normally don't see on a day-to-day basis. So you can't have any Tom, Dick, and Harry or a Joker come in front of the troops and say, buddy, follow me and we will do this. They won't listen to him. They will laugh him off. Matter of fact, in cases like Vietnam, you might be aware, they would actually shoot those officers. You know, the term fragging actually came from there. When they would use fragmentation grenades to get these tourist lieutenants who would come for a tour of duty and want to do that, you know, for mother and glory and all of that, too much of it, they would actually kill those officers. So, I mean, the point I'm making here is that troops will only follow and will only listen to officers and leaders with whom they have a relationship that has been forged from the past. And of course, it need not be individual officers. It can also be the officer cadre. So, if let's say tomorrow you were commissioned into a unit and you wore the ranks of a lieutenant, you're actually walking on the laurels of lieutenants in the past who have led the troops, and the troops have been confident about their young officers. It's not so much that you earned your spurs until you've actually been in a few operations and stuff like that. So the rallying of the troops and the war cry and the motivational, yeah, we got to do it and all of that, all of this has meaning when the leaders follow it up with the actions on ground. So if you have an organization, let's say there's an enterprise which has unilaterally cut the salary of all its employees by say 30%. And then says, you know, we have to give it for this. You know, that organization is, the troops are unlikely to listen. They will listen to him because they have to. Nowadays in Zoom, the leader will go on and say everyone has to sign and they will listen to him. But very unlikely that those words will have any meaning. So I think it's extremely important for leaders to realize that at this point in time, it's not the time where they can start making their credibility. It's unlikely that they'll. If they haven't built that credibility in the past, if they haven't been caring for their troops in the past, if they haven't actually been more caring for them during this sort of downturn, my sense is just words of enthusing them with bigger, faster, higher, the Olympic logo is not going to work very well. Troops are far smarter than many people give them credit for. Right now, I know many organizations, many people are extremely, and I'm using the word sick in a very deliberate way. I know that in India, 1 in 6 and 1 in 4, depending on which demography you're looking for, people are actually suffering from some form of mental health. It may be stress, it may be whatever. Now, in a situation like this, that ratio of 1 in 4 or 1 in 6 is actually going to increase quite a bit. So you really have a workforce out there which is concerned, which is worried, which is stressed out. And this is the time that they're looking for leaders to give them reassurance, not so much about we are going to conquer the moon and we'll send a man to the moon and while we are doing 30% cut of our wages. These messages. So I often urge my friends who get impressed by ceremonies that they see in the army, that those ceremonies are the manifestations of years and decades of SOPs and behavioral leadership that has happened. You're only seeing the tip. Just by replicating the tip and going in front of the troops and trying to shout and rally them into some sort of enthusiasm is not going to work. Even if it works, it'll be very temporal. It'll last maybe about 72 hours before it comes back to. So I think that aspect needs to be kept in mind.
I think that's a again, you touched upon something really important, and maybe is that one leadership message or motivational message that people should take away from this with. You've got to be empathetic. You've got to have empathy at a time like this, because people have gone through a tough time. They're continuing to go through a tough time. There are challenges that they are facing. It's not easy working from home for everybody. Many of the leaders working in nice offices where things are fine and they think they can manage. So empathy, and I'll give an example. Take an example of somebody who's widely being considered as one of the worst leaders at a time like this. I mean, take Donald Trump, for example. What you said, a lack of empathy during the pandemic on top of a situation where already there was low trust means you have the definition of a very bad leadership situation. And I think he's failed to display empathy at a time like this, which is what is probably costing him.
I mean, way beyond my pay band to comment on the President of the United States element of leadership, but I agree in the broad principle that. But I just want to point out.
These journalists feel it's our job to comment on the.
Oh, of course. I noticed that journalists' job is to comment on other countries' presidents. I've noticed that lately. So, other countries' presidents. So, the point I'm making is slightly different. I think in terms of empathy, we need to distinguish between three elements of empathy that we see very often these days. One, of course, is the lip service empathy, where enough words are said that we need to be together at this point of time. We need to do this. So the CEO will hold a town hall at 8 o'clock in the night to talk to all his employees about the need of empathy, not realizing that most of his employees will not have the luxury that he has of a privacy of his own room. And at 8 o'clock at night, many of his employees, and you've been in Bombay, Vikram, that if his employees will be staying in one-room apartments where if they need to do a Zoom call, his wife and children will have to stand out in the corridor or go to the neighbor's house. Now, when that leader talks about empathy, very clearly, people listen to it from one ear and they'll have a laugh at it. The second element is you do need some tough love at this point of time. Matter of fact, I very often when I'm mentoring some of the CEOs, I give them this problem to solve, and I think the answer illustrates the point that I'm trying to make. So let's say there is a shipwreck, and out of that shipwreck there are 4 people who jump into a lifeboat, and you are the 5th one, and you're the captain of the boat. You're the only one who knows how to sort of navigate that lifeboat, and these 4 are there, and the boat's capacity is 4, so there's 1 person more, and you've got to dump 1 person down. And then there is this whole logic of that 1 person is a scientist, 1 person is an engineer, 1 person is an artist, 1 person is a farmer, and you need the skills of all of these 4 to survive in a marooned island. And whom do you sort of push off? And there is this whole debate, and it's a value judgment debate. The right answer to that is, of course, you push out the heaviest person, because when you push out the heaviest person, you give the remaining people the best chance of survival. So there is an aspect of empathy. I think at a leadership level, all of us have to realize that leaders are tasked with safeguarding the entity called the organization, not the employees of the organization. They come second. The entity of the organization comes first. So a captain is tasked with bringing the ship back home and not the entire crew back home. So if they have to take a priority, that priority will be to safeguard the organization and the bulk of the employees, and not 100%. Of course, that's why I said leadership is about 2 bad decisions, taking a choice between 2 bad decisions. Having said that, any organization where the troops sense, and they don't need any stock reports or investigative journalism to tell them that, wherever they sense a hypocrisy where the leaders are taking care of themselves at the cost of the troops, those leaders will have to pay a price for it sooner or later. They can think that they have fooled their people, but as the great politician once said, that you can fool all of the people some of the time, that stands good for corporates as well. And troops very quickly sense a hypocritical leader.
Right. Last question. What do you do to motivate yourself? I mean, is it spirituality? Is it meditation? Is it reading? Which of these? What works?
All of it, I guess. A little bit of all of it. I think one of the things that works for me, at least, is acknowledging that these are tough times. And trying to be. I'm not saying it in a grandiose way, but trying to be really vulnerable. To say it's okay to feel down. It's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to not have all the answers to the situation. It's all okay to feel a little bit of anxiety. It's okay to be, sort of concerned. And I think the very fact of knowing that this is a sort of a paradigm change that we are going through, and in the change, everything is topsy-turvy. It's like a storm. Everything is floating and you don't know where it will settle. So if we are comfortable in that position of ambiguity, my sense is, and I think we have survived enough storms, Vikram, to know that in the end, it'll all be okay.
All right, Raghu. Well, such a pleasure having a conversation with you.
Vikram, as always. Thanks, Satan. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.